Welcome to the Digible Dudes. I'm Nicole.
And I'm Isobel.
And clearly we are not the dudes. So I don't know if we're the Fiona felines or what, but we got the females in the house today. Today we wanted to jump on and do a quick podcast recapping a session we attended at OpTech. The name of the session was Opportunities and Risks in the Single Family Rental Market. So single family rental has been huge. We've been hearing about this from a lot of our clients. So we thought it would be great to attend the session. So the host of the session was Chase from Entrada. We also had representation from Marker and then Graystar as well. So that there was a great panel to kind of kick us off.
Yeah, I feel like it was a great level set in terms of confirming our assumptions that single family is coming through. I know we've been plenty busy with all of our conventional multifamily properties, but definitely a timely subject as like the housing market is exploding. Multifamily has seen like huge growth and stability this year. It's like the untapped area. Sure. I feel like one of the few that's left. So I feel like this is super timely, and especially heading into the new year with all the new development coming in.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I thought it was great how they kind of opened up the session with kind of the alphabet soup glossary here. So I know we had some good notes, but what were some of the ones that stood out to you?
I know. I felt like I got whiplash at first where they were like SFR, BFR, horizontal apartments. And I'm like, excuse me, what language? But just like we learned the language of conventional multifamily, I feel like this language is pretty simple. So my I guess elementary interpretation of it all, SFR is the fancy term for single family rental. Mm-hmm. So those neighborhood or single family rentals that are not purchased homes, but kind of the individual units that are sitting around that are houses, versus the BTR, which is build to rent, which are those like bigger communities that are all branded the same, almost like the model homes, but rentals. So I feel like that's a really interesting concept that I've seen popping up, like especially in Denver for us. We see it all over the place because it's that whole like first child, second dog syndrome.
Yeah, that was such a great term that they kept using. Yeah. First child, second dog, and specifically hitting on like the key demographic from the research was that like 40 to 44-year-old demographic. And then right behind that with 35 to 39. So kind of like older millennials who are having their first kid or have their second dog that want more space. Yeah. So that was definitely a fun term that I took away.
Right. And the fact that I think garages was the thing that distinguishes the difference between SFR, BTR, and then I love the term horizontal apartment.
Yeah. What would you take as that definition?
Yeah. I've actually ran into these a little bit with some of our multifamily clients where they call them cottage homes, where it's like you don't have a neighbor above you or below you, but you might have one on the side. So it's like not quite a townhome, but it's definitely not a high rise or like a garden style apartment. It's like you have your own individual unit. I guess cottage is a good term for it. Yeah. It's like nice and cozy, and
that is a great term.
Bit smaller than some of the single family rentals.
Yeah. And then the other one we have as a takeaway was just the term scattered sites, which was single family, so not really built to rent communities, but single family homes that are scattered around either a certain demographic or a certain location, market. And the leader in this space is really Progress Residential. They have 70,000 plus scattered sites for single family, and then Zillow coming in kind of hot in the single family space.
Yeah, I feel like the Zillow conversation could be its own podcast in terms of what they're doing in the rental space, like the home owning space, in terms of actually owning the assets rather than being the site where people go to look for them.
For sure. Okay, so we hit on the garages. The other thing that was super important as a takeaway was like the private fenced backyard was huge. So there was this shift from, in apartment or in unit amenities or community amenities to really like, what does this space look like? So what does that ownership feel like? It's really about pride in where you live. So really the attraction is this private fenced backyard, the garages. So I thought that was interesting because they were like, don't even worry about amenities. Like for the community, it's really about like, what's in the home, and then also the yard and exterior area as well.
Yeah. And I think the laundry room was also a big differentiator. Like for apartments, it's very much like, is it in my unit? And now we're taking it a step further and saying, well, no, I want a dedicated space for my laundry. I don't want it like in my bedroom anymore or in the bathroom as a stackable unit. Like they need a dedicated space for their laundry because it is that like obviously higher price point. And you definitely want kind of the bells and whistles at home like you would have if you were buying a home.
Yeah. So we're kind of getting into kind of what to know when you're operating an SFR. So we talked about like amenities. The other thing that came up was like smart tech, like that being huge. So really smart tech when it comes to like the appliances and how that's enabled. But that was a really big key takeaway that you have to consider that if you are getting into the single family rental space.
Yeah, I think what stuck out for me a lot was smart tech, like not only for the end consumer, so the renter themselves, obviously the modern consumer wants that connectivity. They want to be able to control their heat, air conditioning from their phone, but also for the operations. So like obviously these units are larger. It's a longer commitment. People are staying there for 2-3+ years, which I'm sure we'll dive into at some point. But just knowing like having those smart technologies to say like, oh, these 5 units are due for like an HVAC replacement or a filter replacement, just because it's a larger commit, it's a larger area, it's a larger cost to turn the units. So being able to have that smart tech to monitor, and I think they called it like proactive maintenance, which is a really interesting concept for me, because I know like being like and living in an apartment myself, it's very much like, oh, it's broken, I need to put in a maintenance request, rather than them coming after us and saying, oh, it's time to do XYZ for your apartment.
Yes. And they talked about like really using the bulk Wi-Fi of some of these like build to rent communities to enable the smart technology to be able to schedule, again, that proactive or preventative maintenance, to schedule those maintenance requests, so that during peak season where everyone wants to like be outside and host barbecues and like get family together, that you're not getting this influx and really putting stress on the maintenance team. So that was really smart on how to like operate more efficiently.
Yes. It's definitely, it's its own ecosystem, both for the renter themselves and then the operators that are managing them.
Yeah. Well, there was a lot of talk about maintenance when it comes to single family versus multifamily. Any other key takeaways?
Yeah, I think a little bit of what I started to touch on about turnover. So I think these units are typically 3+ bedrooms, often like multiple floors. So like to turn a unit, come in and clean it, repaint it, like make any sort of maintenance adjustments is definitely going to be a higher cost and a longer window to clean it. And knowing that the units aren't turning as faster, it's easier to schedule the maintenance. So they talked about like traveling maintenance teams. So instead of having someone on site that's always on demand for whatever's coming up, it's more so like this community has 2 units that are turning. We're going to send the maintenance team here and then kind of travel around if they have different communities in different markets. So really smart way to have a staff that's efficient and being utilized. Because I know, especially with the pandemic, like it's been so hard to hire staff and keep staff when it comes to maintenance specifically. I know people are kind of bouncing around, and I feel like that's a great incentive to keep your staff, engaged and busy and make the most use of them, and also like efficient in terms of cost.
Yeah. Yeah, that was great. Like the traveling staff. They also talked about just in general for maintenance with single family rentals, there's written into some of the contracts would be certain things that fall on the resident. So changing light bulbs, clogged toilets, like stuff that is just more of the everyday that typically in multifamily you are pinging that maintenance team for, it really falls on the resident. And so they're getting some reduced labor there because that user and that resident is taking on those responsibilities. So that was really interesting as well.
And I think going back to like the age range and kind of the, I guess, maturity level is like the word that's coming to mind. But I mean, there's no better way to put it right now for me. But I think just the fact that they're having a lot of more pride on their unit, they're staying there longer, they are willing to do some of those like day-to-day things. That definitely is an efficiency and a gain for the operators.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. Anything else the big takeaway on operations, I guess we'll hit it. This was kind of like the light bulb moment, I think, for a lot of people in the room, was that on average, they were seeing a 3% lift in NOI compared to similar operations on the multifamily side. So we talked about the traveling maintenance being a cost saver there, but I think the bigger one was the reduction in like leasing staff.
Yes.
So really operating more efficiently because you can handle more units or homes per person.
Yes. I feel like even though it's a newer market and kind of uncharted territory for some like property management companies, it is somewhere where you can learn from when it comes to the conventional space. Because we all know like NOI is such a huge number for our clients. I know marketing does play a small role in that, but at the end of the day, if we can connect back to that and take some learnings from this session for our more conventional clients, I feel like that was a huge takeaway.
Yeah. For sure. I feel like one of the big themes was just like think differently. Like don't think about this as, rinse and repeat. Let's take the formula that works for multifamily and put it towards single family. It's like really throw out the playbook, start from scratch, and think about the resident and what that experience is going to be like. So that was a very much hit home theme. Is just like really think outside the box.
Yeah.
Well, what about some of the challenges? I mean, we kind of talked about operation efficiency, some of the things that may attract some multifamily developers and property management companies to get into single family, but it also comes with a lot of challenges.
Definitely. I mean, I think what I didn't even think of when I walked in the room, I was like, oh, single family rental is like pretty straightforward, was the fact that you have to deal with zoning.
Yes.
And like, I think the level of detail with zoning can change like per community, which like for a conventional family, it's like or conventional multifamily, you'll know like, oh, Minneapolis, this area is not zoned for multifamily. I'm not going to be able to build an asset there, or like I can only build certain levels. Different things like that are just more, I would say, similar for conventional units, whereas like you may be in like a municipality that requires, I don't know, some sort of energy efficient, like sort of utility or things like that. And then zoning for housing, I think, can get a lot more detailed depending on where you are. So that was something I was like not expecting to hear or even really think about.
Yeah. And it sounds like having to really tell the story to get some of those things approved, to really bypass some of those challenges, is really educating the market on what the value of a single family rental can be. And I think you hit on it with the longer tenure, like they're staying there for maybe 3 years and then potentially buying homes in that same submarket. So long term, it really is going to help the area, but you really have to like tell the story and educate, because there are a lot of roadblocks when it comes to like the planning and zoning.
For sure.
All right. So I know we also wanted to get to the marketing piece, but before we head into that, anything else from this session that really was a light bulb moment?
I mean, I just think it's not like such a quick process like we're used to. I think we always say like, oh, typically someone is going to make a decision on an apartment within 30 to 60 days. We have some sort of level to say like, oh, males typically make a quicker decision. But I think for this segment, not only is it going to be like a smaller size of the audience, but it's also going to be someone who takes a lot longer to make a decision. Because I know me, like when I was trying to pick a car, that's a huge investment. It took me like 18 months to figure out the color, the model, like what I wanted. So I think, like you said, throwing everything out the window and starting again, or using marketing knowledge from other industries where it is a longer sales cycle to say, like, what are the things that they're considering? How many touch points are you going to need? I think that obviously gets into our marketing discussion a bit more, but just understanding like the behavior of the consumer here is it's not a renter. It's going to be actually more similar to some other large purchases that they might be making.
Yeah, that's a great segue, because when we think about our digital marketing strategy and campaign structure, I think we have really good data to support the formulas we have in place. So it's like, okay, great. If we're in pre-leasing, here's the media mix. Here's what it looks like in lease up versus stabilized. And again, we're throwing that playbook out. I think the main thing when thinking about the marketing strategy is that longer lease cycle, but then also the stay of that prospect. So what are some of the platforms, campaigns that kind of come to mind that could be a good fit for the single family space?
I think it goes back to what you were saying earlier about telling a story. So, I mean, platform obviously is a huge consideration. And I know for Digible specifically, we're always about platform, multi-platform strategy. But I think you need to start with the message with these folks and say, like, when and how is the right way to say this, because you're going to have to tell that story for a longer period of time. And you're going to have to bring in kind of more attributes, like hit on the different amenities. It's not as straightforward as an apartment might be. So I think when it comes to strategy, like a clear message and a consistent message over a longer period of time is going to be more successful, just because we know, like I said, it's a smaller audience. It's going to take some more convincing. They do have other options other than this one community that we might be promoting. So it's definitely more competitive.
Yeah. And I think we also have to think about the increase in acquisition costs, which they said pretty clearly from the marketing standpoint, but it's going to cost more to acquire, a lead, a lease, a really interested prospect. And you just have to know that going in. The marketing costs are going to be higher for this type of initiative. And to your point, telling the story to me is, how can we get that message across, whether that's video content or native articles like copy or blog posts. And so I think it's a little bit more top of funnel than what we typically see for multifamily. And so I think that's something that you have to consider, because a lot of the digital marketers in the space, I think, are very much used to those lower funnel conversion tactics, which definitely have a place here. But I think we really have to take a step back and say, okay, how can we really foster that prospect along the journey and really hit them from that top of the funnel earlier on? Yes.
And I feel like the marketing isn't going to stop once the lead is generated. So, I mean, you might get someone who comes and tours the community and isn't ready to, sign that lease for 6 months, or they might be even looking into buying or something like that. So I think even after the lead is generated, like hitting them with, again, that brand awareness to say, almost like a retargeting strategy to say, like, keep us in mind, like, here's why, here's like giving you more reasons to continue down this pipeline, where I feel like a lot of people might fall off earlier. Like with an apartment, it's very much you tour and right away. With I think a single family rental, it's more like I've toured, I'm going to sit on it. I'm going to try and think about, is this right for me? Like it's a longer decision. I keep saying the same thing, but I think that's like the crux of the issue and how we need to think about it when we're looking at single family.
Yeah. I think it's also important to think about the data segment. So we talked a little bit about this with, our data segment now, we call it EL90. So expiring leases within 90 days. How can we really purchase data to hit on this, older millennial, maybe 35 and up, that is looking to make that next step from an apartment community potentially to a single family? And using those data segments could be really interesting. It's like buying new mover data, not filtering out for units like we do now, but really thinking about or potentially filtering for units that have been in a unit for 3+ years or have had that longer tenure. So I think data can be huge here, just having to know how to slice and dice it to make it applicable to this prospect.
Exactly.
Awesome. Anything else we want to hit on? I mean, I feel like the session was really great. I learned a lot. I think that was one of the big takeaways. I feel like you and I were sitting next to each other just taking copious notes. So I thought it was really interesting, and I felt like it was really valuable for me. So I'm sure there's some stuff we didn't get to, but I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. Like we're almost back to the millennials. Like I know for conventional multifamily, and we're looking at more Gen Z now, which is crazy to think about. But there is a new wave of renters. So it's funny to kind of look at the millennials in a different way. And now that we know so much about the millennial bracket, like we are picky. I say we because I'm a millennial, but like we are picky. We're not going to settle. We are going to take time and do the research. Like we are just inundated with advertising and data, and it's so accessible that we're going to gather it and we're going to sit on it and we're going to try and make the right decision. So I feel like it's almost like the reemergence of the millennial, and how do we continue to target them? And like they're much smarter now. Like they're not going to fall for like top of the search ad. I'm going to continue and tour and buy and go through the process. I'm going to need more convincing than that. So
totally.
I think, like we said, just multi-platform lead nurturing, like using our data like a little bit deeper than we typically do, just because this audience is going to be harder to find, harder to keep engaged, things like that.
For sure. And with that millennial audience being so picky and so specific, I think it's also important that they're going to pay more for a product that delivers high value. So I think the price per square foot, when compared to multifamily, is higher for single family, but overall that deal size is greater because they're willing to pay a premium for things, bringing it back to the garage. They're willing to pay a premium for the garage, for the fenced-in backyard, for the space that they're getting, because there's not a ton of 3-bedroom, apartment units. It's really, graduating from the multifamily community to this space, which is much larger, and they're willing to pay more for that. So I think that's important, where it's like the opportunity is there, but you have to have that right messaging for them to be willing to buy.
Yes. And I mean, I think something we haven't really chatted about that was in some of my pages and pages of notes was just the markets that single family makes sense for. Like I know for multifamily, we deal with a lot of urban markets. It's city markets. It's about location, proximity. But with single family, it is going to be that kind of stepping into the more suburban. But obviously, we know millennials aren't going to want to live in the middle of nowhere, or, might not be able to get into that whole like white picket fence situation. But it was interesting to me to hear like it's not so much like Charlotte or Raleigh. It's more like the Greensboro market of North Carolina. So it's like, what are these areas that millennials might be moving out of that we can capture their attention and, use that to our advantage in terms of knowing where they are and where they're coming from, because that's definitely going to help capture their attention earlier, like get them on board earlier, and then obviously helps with the conversion rate for sure.
Totally. And it'll be interesting to see how the market landscape shifts, or what, major markets this will hit next, but it is very much more suburban areas right now.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right. Well, this was a great session and hopefully a very valuable recap.
Yeah, I feel like we're going to hop on again in 6 months and have like all these different data points, because I'm excited.
That's for sure. I mean, single family is definitely emerging and not going anywhere. So I'm sure the trends will continue to change pretty rapidly.
And it needs digital. I feel like there's no way they're going to survive without digital.
100%. All right. We'll tune in next time.
This Digible Dudettes out.
We're out.